everyone. Thanks for coming to office hours. I'll just do like a quick run through of how this is going to work. So we have a couple amazing Shopify folk here today, a bunch in the audience. Yeah, little clap. You'll get to know them better in a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Rose and Ufuk come up here, introduce themselves. They'll tell you a bit about what they do at Shopify, and we'll open it up for questions. So I'll come around with a mic. Just raise your hand if you have a question after they're done their intro, and we have some other Shopify folk hiding in the audience as well who might be able to contribute to those. So yeah, why don't we just get started? Come on up, friends.
Hi everybody, I'm Rose Wiegley. I'm a senior staff software engineer at Shopify. I'm guessing most of the people in the audience think of Shopify at a Ruby conference from the point of view of what our amazing contributors to Ruby do. I am not one of those people. Most of the engineers on Shopify are not actually working on Ruby or Ruby on Rails. We are very excited that we have teams that do that, but a lot of us are working on Shopify as the product. So we come to Ruby and Rails from the point of view who have to use Ruby and Rails every day to have an amazing programming experience at our job. For me, I work over in what we call merchant services, specifically the money division. So if you've ever gone to a Shopify store and checked out through the checkout and used any form of payment method, most likely that has gone through code in the money team. My specific area is Shop Pay Installments, where we provide the glue layer so that for a merchant or a buyer who is checking out with Shop Pay, it looks like it is a completely smooth checkout experience. And you would only know we're working with a partner because we have powered by listed in a few places. And the goal is to make it as easy and transparent for both the merchant and the buyer. As part of this, I have to use Ruby on Rails basically every day, or at least my team does. As a senior staff software engineer, if you look at my GitHub contribution bar, you will notice it is a lot less green than it once was. But I'm still very comfortable working in the Ruby and Rails language and really enjoy coding it. So I'm here to answer questions you have from the point of view of somebody using the language.
Hello, my name is Ufuk Kayserilioglu. I'm an engineering manager on the Ruby and Rails infrastructure team. I lead the Ruby infrastructure part of the team. And our team is the team that works on the Rails framework and the Ruby language. So my team specifically work on the Ruby language to make improvements, to improve performance, and to make it work better for Shopify and for the whole community overall. A few of the projects that we are taking on right now is, like I said, making improvements inside the C Ruby codebase. C Ruby codebase probably being the Ruby that you use at work. Matt's Ruby interpreter, the main Ruby. But there are alternative implementations of Ruby as well, which bring different things to the table, like Truffle Ruby. So we have a team that works on Truffle Ruby at Shopify. So Truffle Ruby is our long-term bet. We want to see where it can take us and take our code bases with its peak performance numbers. So we're trying to get Truffle Ruby to run in production, but we're also taking some ideas from Truffle Ruby because it's a great research platform as well. So we're taking some of the ideas and bringing them back to the C Ruby code base, one of which is recently object shapes. So object shapes is a well-known technique that's implemented in various languages, including Truffle Ruby. So we took that idea and we've brought it to the C Ruby code base, and object shapes is actually merged and will be released with the Ruby 3.2 release. Another thing we do is Widget. So YJIT is a just-in-time compiler for the Ruby language. It was first released with Ruby 3.1, and now it has been ported to Rust from C this year and had a lot of great memory improvements and performance improvements, and it will be released with Ruby 3.2. Another thing we do is to look at developer tooling, because our team's clients, our team's customers are actually people like Rose who work with the Ruby language inside Shopify. So we want to provide solutions to those teams so that they can work more effectively. So we look at developer experience and developer tooling. So we do things like adopt gradual typing using Sorbet, work on tools like Ruby LSP to make development experiences better. So that's like a high-level overview of the kind of things my team does, and we have a few people from my team that work on these things. So if you have any questions, I can hand off the question over to them so that they can give you a better answer, or I can try to answer them as best as I can.
Okay, so with that, I think we'll just go to questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand, and I will do my best to get to everybody in somewhat the order that they raise their hand. And if we run out of questions, we can also maybe just float through the audience, chit-chat, anything like that. So I'm going to grab the mic and mask up and raise your hand. If you have a question, I'll come find you.
Not all at once.
Yeah, slow down. We'll test. Is this? Yep, this works.
Thank you. Hello. I'm wondering, as an engineering manager, how could you make the business case, like the business use case for contributing to Ruby and Truffle Ruby for performance? Like how did that happen, and how did product go along with it?
Okay. Thank you. That's an excellent question. Okay. I think the framing is a little bit different. What we're doing isn't working on open source or working on a specific technology. Our team is actually a part of the developer acceleration team. So the mandate of our team is to accelerate our internal developers, but to do that at the right layer of the stack. If you solve problems at the right layer of the stack, then you solve it for a broader number of people. And sometimes that means that you need to solve problems inside the Ruby language or inside the framework. And because the language and the framework are basically the foundations of our product, if they crumble, then our product will crumble as well. Thankfully, we have a CEO who comes from a technical background, and he appreciates this thing that I just laid out, and he appreciates how important it is for us to not only contribute back to the tools that we use, but how important contributing back is for Shopify itself as well. So in that sense, I think that's the main thing that we do. It's not that we do research, it's not that we do open source. We solve the problems at the right level of abstraction. Just like how product teams solve their own problems at their level of abstraction. We're also a product team working on the C Ruby product or the Rails product. Please, yeah.
I can add a couple things on convincing generally leadership to let you do infrastructure projects, because on the product side of thing, we have our product-facing work, but we also have our infrastructure work, whether it be we want to refactor this code or we want to clean up this thing. And the thing I've found, and it helps that, as you said, we have a CEO that, like, from the top down, we have a mandate that infrastructure is important. But what we still have to do is learn to speak the kind of product and manager language. So instead of saying, I want to do this contribution, you have to start by talking about the problems. Like, this thing is too slow. If we do this contribution, then we believe we could speed up performance for our users by X%. Or if we, even better, really start talk product language and talk about for example, we have checkout, and the longer a checkout takes, the more likely somebody is going to walk away from that checkout. So talk about, if we speed this up, checkout will be faster by X%, or we hope to make it faster by X%, and that will lead to higher conversion to customers. And so if you turn this infrastructure level work into product speak, then you're much more likely to be able to sell that in your companies.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Wait.
I'm curious if you can say, do you keep with the current versions of Ruby for your application?
Yes, and aggressively so. Actually, there's some statistics that I haven't shared publicly, just not that it's secret, but I took a look at how fast it took our core monolith to get onto the latest version of Ruby historically. And off the top of my head, I think for Ruby 2.4 and 2.5, it was like 300 days or something. And then for 2.7 and 3.0, it took us 90 days to actually get onto that latest version with some patches because there was some instability. But starting with Ruby 3.1, we've actually moved the needle a lot higher. It took us 18 days from release day to get our core monolith, which is arguably the largest Rails code base in the world, 18 days from release day for us to get running on Ruby 3.1. And that includes the end of year break. So it was actually like a 4-day effort to do the switch and to get running on 3.1. But a lot of work went into that to prepare for that. 4 days or 18 days. So for the last 3 or 4 months of the release, we actually, on the Ruby infrastructure team, we changed our focus to making sure that the Ruby release was stable. Because if we have an unstable Ruby, then that means we need to troubleshoot that and we need to figure out why it's crashing, and that makes it take longer for us to switch to the latest version. So we did a lot of work to improve stability, to fix bugs. We run our CI nightly on the latest Ruby head. So whatever Ruby commits there are on that day, our 200,000 tests run every night against that. And every crash that we find there, we analyze and we make sure that we know how to fix it, or we let people who have introduced those instabilities so that they can fix it. So we're doing similar kind of work right now. We're wrapping up all of our contributions and aggressively looking at how to stabilize the release so that we can do the same thing for Ruby 3.2. To add to that, and maybe Rose can talk a little bit about that, we've also been pushing other teams inside of Shopify to do a similar aggressive move on their code bases, because our core monolith isn't the only code base. And now we're giving teams up until, I think, April or May to move to the next version of Ruby, which the company did last year for Ruby 3.1, and we're hoping to do the same with Ruby 3.2 this year.
Yeah, I can speak to this a little bit. So for example, if I can mention Rails for just a minute, even though we're at a Ruby conference, my team gets, because we live in a slightly different monolith. Shopify has one giant monolith, but we also have a couple other, I will say, smaller, in quotes, monoliths, but they're still very much monoliths. And we will get automated PRs generated that say, update to this next level of Rails, where that next level of Rails is actually like running directly off Rails, like whatever it happens to be at that moment. And then we get very polite reminders, and then as time moves on, slightly more forceful reminders that you need to upgrade your actual code base to this. And so we try to stay on top of stuff. And it's actually one of the cool things because I used to work in startup land, and if ever you want to find companies that drag their feet on something like updating to the latest version until it is a nightmare, it is really nice, and I highly recommend doing this sort of stay on top of things, because then you spread that pain out, and if you don't, then you make it exponential.
I think I want to add a little bit about why we're doing this. I told you how we're doing it, but not the why. Like Rose said, not only it allows our developers to stay up to date and to use all the latest features, but also all of the work that my team's doing to improve performance, to bring stability. If we never keep up with the latest Ruby release, then that's actually all going to waste for the Shopify code base. So the only way we can use the work that we're doing to improve Shopify is to be on the latest. And through us being on the latest, through us doing all that stability work, it makes also, as a byproduct, it also makes sure that Ruby is more stable and it works better for everyone as well.
Are you using Truffle Ruby in production at all?
Chris, do you want to?
So Truffle Ruby is the highly optimizing implementation of Ruby built by Oracle Labs and being developed at Shopify. We're not using it in production at the moment. We've been exploring several different options for putting it into production. We tried it on, one of our sub-monoliths is designed to render the storefront as quickly as possible for most users. We tried deploying it on that. The issue is that Truffle Ruby is a re-implementation of Ruby from scratch. Right? It's not incremental work, and that's different to something like Yjet. And that means we're trying to regain all that compatibility from scratch. And that's very tricky. So Ruby isn't a very well-specified language. It has test suites and specs and documentation. There's always often a lot of holes in them. We often find that if you have 1,000 lines of code, you might have one little incompatibility in it somewhere. But when you have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of code, you get those little incompatibilities. We're finding ways to tackle those, and we're now able to run another application that's internal on top of Truffle Ruby, so we're looking at deploying that. We're also trying to work against some of the conceptions that Truffle Ruby is built with. When Oracle started Truffle Ruby, their mental model was that you could redeploy the application once a week or something like that, and it would have plenty of time to get going and become fast over time. But Shopify, like most companies these days, deploys much more rapidly than that. So we're having to do some research work with Oracle to readdress that balance and bring it back into line. And that's one of the great things about doing this kind of research at a place like Shopify rather than Oracle, in that I can directly tailor the research we're doing towards the practical business uses and the practicalities of how companies want to use Ruby. And we want to align it to how Ruby wants to be used rather than trying to realign the company to use it in a different way. So that takes a bit of time to get into production, that's why.
So how much of the development of Truffle Ruby is in Oracle as opposed to Shopify, and why isn't Oracle here?
So I didn't introduce myself when I first started. I'm Chris Seaton. I'm the lead of Truffle Ruby at Shopify, and I was the lead at Oracle, so I've been at both. Oracle is at the RubyConf main, and I'll be there as well. So Oracle are still interested in publicizing what they're doing. Sorry, what's the first part of the question? Oh, right. How much is, what's the split of the work? Yeah. So Oracle works on the core compiler technology and the core Ruby functionality. They have a team of about 3 people, I think, at the moment. It has been larger over time and smaller over time. And a lot of that work is shared between different languages. So that compiler technology is reused between their JavaScript implementation, their C implementation, their Python implementation, and their Ruby implementation. And what we try and do is fill in the gaps about where compatibility matters. We do some of the same work as them, and then we spend some time trying to show them what's important and align their work towards what is important for production. So the two teams are very similar, working on similar things. Theirs is a bit more down to the compiler level, whereas ours is a bit more to the deployment level.
was another follow-up to that. It was, are any of those other language implementations running on Graal, are they further along in terms of production usage, like the Python, say?
So JavaScript is the one that's furthest along. It's a simpler language. People think JavaScript is crazy, right? And people joke about how it's got funny semantics. It's actually a fairly simple, understandable language. The rules don't always make sense in your head, but at least you can write them down and understand them, which is fine for language implementers. So there are people using JavaScript in production, yes, which is proving the concept. Python has more compatibility issues because of things like the garbage collection situation is different, and it's harder to recreate that and get good compatibility, and that's a big problem for other alternative Python implementations. Ruby is fairly far along, though. It was the one started directly after JavaScript. But yes, it is in production, and Graal, the compiler that underlines it, that's in production at quite a lot of places. For example, Twitter, I believe, are still running Graal. I can't ask anymore because everyone I knew there has left. But Twitter were using Graal, the underlying compiler, to have a really significant two-digit percentage impact, which is saving them a lot of money. So the underlying technology is in production, yeah.
Do they sell all the RPCs using that?
Yeah. It's good at optimizing where the RPC is, clearly.
With this continued upgrading of your Ruby programs, is there continued education or programs that you offer for your employees to be able to keep up with it, such as like Lunch and Learns or paying for like Udemy? And then a second part is, do you have any sort of measurements built in, such as like built-in downtime, to make sure that they have the time to learn that's not creeping into their work-life balance?
Jenna.
Okay, I can take this one. I want to talk for a minute about general Shopify's attitude towards learning. I remember when I first joined, which was 2 years ago, and was having one of my early one-on-ones with my manager, and he told me if I found myself having trouble making some time every work to do continuing education, and he didn't just mean continuing education on the thing I needed this day for my job, but general engineering continuing education. He said I needed to schedule a meeting in my calendar to make sure that I was blocking out that time. So one of the things that I really truly appreciate about Shopify is the fact that they talk about wanting their developers to be 40% better every year. And this isn't just something they say so that in the evening on my own time, I'm trying to learn something. This is something they say because they want me to carve out time in my calendar and make the time to do that. And they provide a bunch of resources. When you onboard to Shopify, we hire people independent of programming language because we think if you know how to be a developer, then you can learn a language. So during onboarding, we provide classes on Ruby on Rails. If you're front end, I believe we have a React class. So we provide as part of the onboarding, and this is something where you literally this week during onboarding, if you need this class, this is when you will take it with your cohort of other onboarders. Then we also have a bunch of other things. We had Developer Summit recently, which was a bunch of different classes. We do coffee and tea sessions, which are random. For example, I just led one recently with a friend of mine on what it means to be a staff developer at Shopify. It might also be a much more technical coffee and tea. And then we will also have learning resources that you can go out. Is there anything specific?
I can add a few. Obviously, whatever you do, one size is not going to fit all, because we also have people that work on React, not just Ruby, React Native, WebAssembly now, different teams. The data science teams work more with Python. So we can't just offer Ruby courses or whatever for the whole team. But what we try to do is also to allow people to own their own development. That's actually the name of the program inside Shopify, which allows them to just get access to courses, educational material, books, and just expense it, or to come to conferences like this. Shopify supports the full conference experience. So, through access to things like that, we allow, I hope we're able to allow people to get further on with their careers. The lunch and learns and etc. are more specific to teams, so we allow teams to organize that. But we also have special interest groups. For example, we have a special interest group for Ruby. That's all the people inside of Shopify that are interested in Ruby, that want to learn more. They have weekly meetings, presentations. Chris actually just presented something to the special interest group the other week about some experimental technology for how you can trace nil values and where they're coming from in your code base. So we try to do internal education through that as well.
I think when you think about something like that upgrade process, the counterpoint to it is Shopify makes it really easy to understand the new version of Ruby and really easy to understand how to migrate your application to it, because there's so much support from senior people. You can't possibly get stuck at Shopify on any Ruby issue whatsoever. Right? If you've ever been working on a Ruby upgrade and struggled, I don't understand this new functionality, there's a Slack group at Shopify where you can go into and you get a completely correct, definitive answer to any question about Ruby whatsoever. If it's in working hours, you'll get it immediately. And that means that you can be really confident about things like upgrading. The deal is we'd like you to upgrade really quickly, but we'll make sure it's completely possible for you and as painless as possible, and you can't ever get frustrated or stuck doing it. And you can focus on your application development and enjoying using Ruby without worrying, is the ecosystem working well? Are the upgrades going to be a nightmare? You can just get on with enjoying the actual application programming.
I just want to add to that from the person who has made use of this channel. It's awesome. People are kind, friendly. You can ask any question you need to understand something, like, this weird thing in active job that we tried to do, did this thing differently? Could somebody explain to me why and how we're misunderstanding it? And so all the rest of us really appreciate the fact that our Ruby on Rails and Ruby teams who are really busy doing their own stuff take the time out to answer all of our questions. And it's a really nice Shopify perk.
Actually, sorry.
You sneak in there.
Yeah, okay. I have actually one anecdote to share on this. So Ariel Kaplan, he works at Shopify now, but he was, before he joined Shopify, he was trying to prepare his slides for last year's RubyConf. And he was going to talk about arrays, and he just noticed some behavior that he didn't expect with Ruby. So common advice is, if you're going to add something to arrays, add them to the end instead of to the front, because if you add them to the front, then Ruby needs to shift all the values just to make space at the front for your new value, whereas adding to the end is almost free, right? But he was benchmarking it, and it turned out there was no difference. And he couldn't really figure out. So he tweeted, I said, maybe my team can answer it. So he wasn't even at Shopify. So I asked a few people in my team, why could this be? I couldn't figure it out myself. And then we had Kevin Newton, and Peter Shu from my team. They dug into the code base. They figured it out. Apparently, there's an optimization inside the CRuby code base that was done in 2.0, 2.1 something. And then we sent him the links, and he was able to actually add it to his slides and explain why that's efficient. So you can have things like that constantly at your disposal working at Shopify.
Awesome. So we are at time. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to our office hours. If you do have any more questions, these guys are around. Lots of Shopify hoodies out here. We've got, Eileen, Maxime, Jenna. I can't name all the Shopify people here, as you've probably noticed. We like to travel in groups. So just come find us and enjoy the rest of the conference.